Hi, so excited to be with you and have some exciting news. And if you've been following me on LinkedIn, you already know that I have a new book. I got a book deal, and I'm going to have a new book come out in the spring of 2022. And as of today, I still don't know the title, but if you were one of the people that gave me feedback, we did a survey. This particular publisher, Barrett Kohler, has a process that I absolutely love about picking the title. And so there's been a couple of fun titles and interesting titles, and we haven't made the final decision yet. But if you were part of that, I just want to say thank you. And your opinions are very meaningful to me. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And I want to tell you about a concept that I have in the book. And that's what I'm going to start doing my LinkedIn lives on, is just sharing what's in the book and getting your thoughts and feedback, or maybe hearing some of your stories about conflict. So here's a little bit of the backstory. I started working on the concept of improving performance through conversations. And I developed a program about having the performance conversation model, because I started to see this sign that people often were avoiding conversations, and that was part of the problem. And so I started noticing that that was also related very much to conflict. Over the years, I've been doing some LinkedIn learning videos. So I've done some on conflict management, difficult conversations for managers, anger management, those kinds of things. And I started meeting people. A lot of the people I've met here, people from across the country, across the world even, that would give me information about the conflicts they were having and how much distress this was causing. So fast forward, and now I have a book, and we're going to be talking about conflict. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is the concept that conflict is not really the problem, mismanagement is. And so I want to talk about ways that we mismanage conflict. Would love to get some of your ideas as well. If you're watching this now, if you're watching this later, I'd love to hear from you, because some of the things that I've heard about from you on LinkedIn is going in my book as examples. And so the first way that I believe we mismanage conflict is by the very definition of it. I looked up the word conflict in the dictionary several times over the years, and I would always see the definition would be a stage of prolonged fighting, a battle of war, a state of disagreement. And then with that definition, it's already set up to become very personal. And so, we make it about the other person. We say, well, I'm having a conflict with them, versus I don't really understand where they stand versus where I stand. And so, thank you, Gerald. I'm so glad to see you here. We make it very personal, and then we make it about them versus me, versus it's just something I don't understand. We make it about war. We make it about winning. And so I really wanted to start building a new definition of conflict, because if you're seeing it as me against them, you're already mismanaging it by the very nature of how you're viewing it. So I made a definition of conflict that still means conflict, but it gives you a different frame to work from. And my definition is that conflict is really opposing drives, desires, and demands. So if you think about a picture, and the visual I use, and I didn't bring a visual today, but if you think about the picture of two arrows going in opposite directions, there's opposing drives, desires, and demands. And I've often made the joke that I could have conflict even without anybody else in the room, because sometimes I'm on a hamster wheel with, should I do this? Should I do that? I saw that within even choosing a book title. Well, this would mean this would mean that, this would attract this kind of audience. You get into a whole lot of mind drama that can make you unclear and make you in conflict even within yourself. So I started seeing that if we could change the definition of opposing drives, desires, and demands, we could understand that there's an inner game that goes along with conflict. And that inner game has to kind of be cleared up first. And we'll talk more about that maybe on the next LinkedIn Live. But today I want to talk about the ways we mismanage conflict. So the first way is in the very definition. And the second way that we mismanage conflict is that we're simply not curious enough. We think we know someone's intentions, and then it becomes personal. And I cannot tell you how many times I've been coaching someone to have a conversation, and I've done this too. And I'll say, or they will say, well, I already know what they're going to say. And the reason we say that is because we have some facts about the way people are going to see things, because we know them and we know their patterns. But we also don't realize that when we're coming from that perspective, they are going to say what we think they're going to say because we're already loaded up. So if you can say, I'm not quite sure what they'll say because I haven't had the conversation yet, and I'm going to get really curious about what's their drive, what's their desire, what's their demand, because if I can understand that, we may be able to collaborate. And so when we're not curious, when we think we know the intentions, what happens is we make up a narrative, we make up a story about who this person is, we turn them into an enemy, and then there's these levels that we start to see based on how we're viewing the person and based on our interpretations. So it's how it's defined, how we define conflict sets us up to mismanage. Secondly, we're not curious enough. And third, because we don't have the self-awareness skills or even the soft skills, which I call the outer game, we don't have the skill sets, we mismanage by our own behaviors and our own reactions to conflict. And so 3 of those that I'm talking about are really rooted in avoidance. And the 3 that I'm talking about are the 3 A's, which is avoiding, appeasing, and aggression. Why do I say they're the same thing? Because it's all rooted in avoiding what feels bad. So when managers avoid, what I've noticed is they'll avoid even looking at the facts. There's this, if I don't look at it, it'll go away. Or it's the company picnic, I can't have the conversation today. Whatever the reason, there's usually some good reasons, but I also say that the conversation avoided today becomes the lawsuit 10 years later or even 2 years later. Once someone feels that they've been ignored and it starts to go to EEOC, then you start having a lot of problems that you didn't have to have. Hey, Steve, haven't seen you in a long time. Thanks for joining. Fun to see old friends. That's the wonderful thing about social media, right? So we start to see this avoidance pattern. And so then the next one is appeasing. And this is the person that views themselves. This has to do with leadership identity. And I'm going to be talking a lot about leadership identity. If you see yourself as nice and you really, really want to be liked and you really, really care, you can fall into that trap of, I have to have everyone like me. And the very nature of being a leader means you have to make some decisions and have some conversations that aren't comfortable. And there will be times when people don't like you, but they will still respect you, and you can navigate that ship. But that appeasing shows up as, well, that's a great idea. We'll talk about that next week. And then next week never really rolls around. Then there's an excuse. Oh, I didn't mean to. My mom got sick. I didn't mean to not have that. But it is still a good idea. I'm so sorry the time passed for that idea. It's always navigating and fixing instead of just addressing something and exploring it head on where there might be some sort of discussion or some sort of disagreement. So I see appeasing. And then finally, there's aggression. I used to have a boss that he had several different sayings for everything. If you had a complaint, he would say, that's just the way it is. I didn't ask you to work here. And if you don't like it, find yourself another place to work. That aggression, you can say, well, that's not avoiding, but let me make this point. Aggression is still a way to avoid without admitting that you're avoiding. You're avoiding feelings of anger. You're avoiding a conversation where you might lose. You're avoiding the responsibility of building a better relationship. And so I kind of think that aggression is the flip side of avoidance. It's still rooted in avoidance, and it's coming from a defense mechanism. And the more I've worked with executives, executive coaching clients, as an executive advisor, coach, consultant, whatever you want to call it, even at very high levels, it's weird. I never thought this would be so, but it is, even at like executive levels of board of directors, investors, nonprofit boards, executive round table executives that work in the same company. There's a lot of these patterns that are even existing at a very, very high level, and it's very destructive. It really takes away from your productivity. And there's always someone that's super aggressive and unapproachable, and people don't know how to approach that because they don't want the fight, and there's usually a lot of money tied up in it. So avoiding appeasing and aggression, in my mind, it's low conflict capacity. And we have to build that capacity to withstand it emotionally and mentally, because it does take a lot of energy. It takes a lot of brain power. And so the new book is going to be either From Conflict to Courage, or um, uh, building conflict capacity. So I've got a LinkedIn user that says conflict is an opportunity. Yes, it is. And when you start seeing it that way, and I wonder if this is Peter, because you never show up. If this is you, hey, I don't know what we're going to have to do to get you to show up on my thread, but thanks for showing up anyway today. And for those of you that are watching like after the live, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these concepts or what you've experienced with your own behaviors, of what you see at your board meetings, at your roundtables, at, when you're communicating with peers or with employees. Because the more we talk about it and we're willing to change our own patterns, that's when we start to change how we view conflict. And I think it'll change how we interact even on social media and in all relationships. And so I posted not too long ago that disagreement doesn't harm relationships, disrespect does. And so when we start viewing conflict in a respectful manner, and we start viewing other people as simply having opposing drives, desires, and demands, that creates a sense of curiosity and an openness to learning. And it does mean slowing down for a moment, but when you're slowing down to speed up. In other words, what you learn could change the whole dynamic of where you're going versus all the time that's wasted avoiding and battling. And so I just want to end. Thank you so much. Thank you. I would love to talk with you. Please connect with me. Please, Thomas, on the back end of LinkedIn. I call it the back end. I guess that's direct messaging. Yeah, please connect with me there. Anyone that wants to connect with me to share a story, to share an example, maybe your story or example, make it into the book. So some of the ideas floating around, as I've said, conflict is not the problem. Mismanagement is. Mismanagement costs us in growth, collaboration, resources, time, and actually just life enjoyment. So that's one of the concepts, and the concepts that I'm going to be sharing is that there's 3 parts to conflict capacity, and I'll share those in a future LinkedIn Live. And thanks for those that had the chance to join me today. This was scheduled actually for 9 a.m. That's what the little banner says. It was scheduled for 9 a.m. And when I went to StreamYard this morning, it was not there. I don't know whether I didn't save it or whether something happened with daylight savings time. And I tried to get on and schedule, but with LinkedIn, you have to wait an hour. So that's what I decided to just go with it. And I thought, okay, so there's people that will watch this after the fact or people that can join me that wouldn't normally. I'm experimenting with time zones, but thank you for those who were able to join. And just think of this throughout the week, that conflict is not the problem, mismanagement is. And feel free to direct message me with your situation, your information, and maybe you'll make it in the book. I'll see you later.